seriously? Are you just going to stare at that spoon? Or are you going to serve me? The young officer's insult cut through the mess hall noise. He sneered at the 65-year-old woman, her silver hair pulled back, her face a map of wrinkles. Supported by a smirking lieutenant, he was on a power trip, clearly enjoying the confrontation. But when he pointed at the faded tattoo on her arm, mocking it as some granny's biker gang ink, he crossed a line he didn't know existed. Before I tell you what that tattoo really was, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The scene was set in the cavernous, sterile environment of Naval Base Coronado's Mess Hall 3. The air in Mess Hall 3 was thick with the clatter of stainless steel trays, the low hum of industrial ventilation, and the faint, institutional smell of steamed vegetables and disinfectant. It was the lunchtime rush, a river of sailors and Marines in their crisp uniforms flowing along the serving line. At the head of that line stood Anna Vance. At 65, her spine was straight, a testament to a discipline learned long ago. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat, simple bun, and the lines etched around her calm, pale blue eyes told stories of a life lived far beyond the confines of this kitchen. Her movements were economical and precise as she wielded a serving spoon, a quiet island of grace in the noisy chaos. The disruption came from a petty officer, a young man whose uniform was starched to perfection, but whose face was pinched in a permanent scowl of entitlement. "Is this slop even edible?" he'd muttered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Anna had ignored him, her focus remaining on portioning out green beans. But her silence only seemed to fuel his arrogance. He tapped his fork impatiently against his tray. "Hello, Earth to Grandma. Some of us have actual work to do." Anna's weathered hands, which had known the feel of things far heavier and more consequential than a ladle, didn't tremble. She simply lifted her gaze, her clear eyes meeting his without a trace of fear or anger. She scooped a perfect measure of beans and deposited them onto his tray. The gesture was unhurried, almost ceremonial. The petty officer let out a theatrical sigh. Finally, it's a miracle this base functions with civilians moving in slow motion. The tension in the line thickened. A few sailors shifted their weight, suddenly finding the scuffs on their boots fascinating. Others stared intently at their phones, creating a digital wall to hide behind. To intervene was to paint a target on your own back. As the petty officer moved down the line, a supervising lieutenant with a clipboard and an air of harried self-importance noticed the slight delay. "What's the hold-up here, petty officer?" he asked, his tone already primed for accusation. Seeing an opportunity, the young officer gestured back toward Anna. "It's this server, sir. Incredibly slow, and she's got a sour attitude. I made a simple comment about the food, and she's been giving me hostile looks." It was a complete fabrication, a casual lie spun to shift blame and assert dominance. The lieutenant's eyes narrowed, immediately siding with the uniform over the civilian apron. He strode toward Anna, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the linoleum. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice unnecessarily loud. "What's your name?" Anna carefully placed her spoon on a clean cloth beside the steam tray. "Anna Vance, sir," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm just here to serve the food." "That's not what I heard," the lieutenant snapped, puffing out his chest. "I heard you're causing disturbances and holding up my line with your attitude. We have standards of professionalism on this installation, even for our contractors. Maybe this job is a little too fast-paced for you." The petty officer, emboldened and smirking, walked back. He felt vindicated, the victor in a conflict he had manufactured. To escalate his petty triumph, he pointed directly at Anna's forearm, where the rolled-up sleeve of her blue work uniform revealed a portion of a faded tattoo. It was an intricate design, blurred by decades of sun and time, a swirl of what looked like wings around a skull. "What's that supposed to be, old-timer?" he sneered, his voice ringing out across the now silent line. "Leftovers from some granny's biker gang you ran with back in the day." The insult, so public and demeaning, hung in the air like poison. It was meant to be the final, crushing blow of humiliation. The sneering words, "Granny's biker gang," acted as a key, unlocking a door in Anna's mind that had been sealed for decades. The clatter of the mess hall dissolved, replaced by a sound she hadn't truly heard in 40 years. The rhythmic, deafening thump-thump-thump of helicopter blades slicing through thin, cold air. The smell of steamed carrots was gone, replaced by the scent of dust, cordite, and the metallic tang of fear. She wasn't in a kitchen in Southern California. She was 20 years old again, huddled on the open ramp of a Chinook, the wind whipping at her face. Below her, the rugged, unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan unfolded, a panorama of brown and gray rock under a piercingly blue sky. She could feel the familiar, comforting weight of her rifle across her lap and the coarse fabric of her fatigues. She glanced down at her own arm, not the wrinkled, age-spotted skin of today, but the firm, sun-browned arm of a young soldier. There, stark and black against her skin, was the tattoo. It was fresh, the lines sharp, the ink deep. The Ghost of the Ridge. It was the emblem of her unit, a small, elite team tasked with missions that never made it into official reports. They were a promise forged in fire, a vow to never leave a soldier behind, to face the darkness as one. The image vanished as quickly as it had come, a ghost of a memory in the bright, fluorescent lights of the mess hall. But its weight remained heavy and real. A few tables away, a chief petty officer was finishing his lunch. He was a man with 30 years of service etched into his face, a man who understood the Navy's unspoken codes. He'd been ignoring the low-grade drama at the serving line, but the mocking reference to a tattoo caught his ear. He knew the difference between a drunken mistake picked from a parlor wall and a piece of ink that was earned in blood and secrecy. He slowly turned, his gaze sweeping over the scene. He saw the arrogant young officer, the puffed-up lieutenant, and then he truly looked at the old woman behind the counter. He saw the silver hair and the wrinkles, but he also saw the unshakable calm in her eyes, the steadiness of her hands, and the faded ink on her forearm. Even blurred, the design was unmistakable to a man who had heard the whispers and legends. It was a skull, yes, but the wings were not angel wings. They were the jagged, stylized wings of a Predator drone, the symbol of a unit that officially didn't exist. A cold knot of dread formed in his stomach. He knew, with absolute certainty, that the lieutenant and the petty officer were not just being disrespectful. They were standing on a live landmine and stomping. He stood up, not to intervene directly. That would only escalate the humiliation for the old soldier, but to contain the blast. He walked calmly toward the exit, pulling out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumbs stopping on a name that few on the base dared to call directly. He pressed the button. The phone was answered on the second ring. Admiral Miller's office. Ensign Davis speaking. "Ensign, this is Chief Petty Officer Graham," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to get a message to the Admiral. It's a priority 1 emergency." There was a hesitant pause. "An emergency, Chief? What is the nature of the situation?" "Just tell her to get to Mess Hall 3. Immediately. There's a civilian server here, an older woman named Anna Vance." The chief took a deep breath. "Tell her it's about the tattoo on her forearm. Tell her it's the Ghost of the Ridge. She'll know what it means. Tell her to get here now." Miles away, in the hushed, climate-controlled sanctum of the base headquarters, Admiral Catherine Miller was presiding over a high-level fleet readiness briefing. Complex logistical charts and deployment schedules glowed on a massive screen. She was the picture of command, intelligent, resolute, her focus absolute. Her world was one of strategy, geopolitics, and the movements of warships across oceans. The small dramas of a mess hall were in another universe entirely. Suddenly, the heavy door to the conference room opened without a sound. Ensign Davis stood in the doorway, his face pale, his posture rigid with an alarm that violated every protocol he had ever learned. Interrupting a flag-level briefing was an act reserved for imminent threats of war or catastrophic failure. Every senior officer in the room turned to stare. The captain delivering the presentation faltered, his words dying in his throat. Admiral Miller turned her head slowly, her steel-gray eyes fixing on the young ensign. She didn't speak. She simply raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a silent, powerful command for him to justify this breach. "Admiral," the ensign began, his voice a strained whisper. "My deepest apologies for the interruption. I just received a priority 1 call from Chief Petty Officer Graham. He insisted it was an emergency." The Admiral's expression remained a mask of stern patience, her gaze unwavering. "He's in Mess Hall 3, ma'am." The ensign continued, swallowing hard. "He said you needed to come immediately. There's a situation with a civilian server." He knew how ridiculous it sounded. "The name is Anna Vance. The chief said to tell you. He said to tell you it's about her tattoo. He called it the ghost of the ridge." The phrase landed in the sterile, high-tech room with the force of a shockwave. The air itself seemed to crackle. Admiral Miller froze. The pen she had been holding, a sleek silver instrument, slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the polished mahogany table. The sound was deafening in the sudden, absolute silence. Her face, a moment before a study in controlled authority, transformed. The mask shattered, replaced by an expression of profound, stunned disbelief. Her eyes, which had been analyzing naval charts, now looked through the walls, through time itself. The other officers exchanged bewildered glances, having never seen their unshakable commander look so vulnerable, as if she'd just seen a specter from a forgotten war. "Repeat that, ensign," she commanded, her voice low and tight with an intensity that made the young man flinch. "Anna Vance, ma'am," he stammered. "And the ghost of the ridge." Admiral Miller shot to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. The briefing, the charts, the fleet, all of it evaporated from her mind. There was only the name and the emblem. "Gentlemen," she said to the stunned officers, "this briefing is over." She strode toward the door, grabbing her cover from side table. "Ensign, you're with me," she snapped as she passed him. "Give me every file you can find on an Anna Vance with a service record connected to JSOC Special Activities. Now." Back in the small, windowless office behind the mess hall kitchen, the lieutenant was delivering his final, self-satisfied verdict. Anna sat calmly in a cheap plastic chair, her hands resting on her knees. The petty officer stood by the door, arms crossed, his triumphant smirk firmly back in place. "So, that's how it's going to be, Ms. Vance," the lieutenant said, leaning back. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. We can't have employees who are insubordinate. We might even need to recommend you for a cognitive evaluation." The threat was a final, gratuitous twist of the knife. Just as he reached for the phone to call security, the office door flew open with such force that it slammed against the wall, rattling the cheap motivational posters. Framed in the doorway stood Admiral Miller. She was flanked by her aide and a stone-faced Master Chief, whose chest was a billboard of combat ribbons. The sheer weight of rank that had just entered the tiny office was suffocating. The air crackled with an authority that made the lieutenant's power play seem like a child's tantrum. Beyond the door, the entire mess hall had fallen silent. A sea of faces, all frozen, were now standing at attention. The sharp, unified call of "attention on deck" echoed a half-second after the Admiral's arrival, a thunderous report in the cavernous room. The lieutenant and the petty officer snapped to attention, their bodies going rigid with shock. The lieutenant's face drained of all color, turning a pasty white. The petty officer's smirk dissolved into a slack-jawed expression of pure terror. Admiral Miller's eyes, as cold and hard as chips of ice, swept past them as if they were nothing more than furniture. She ignored their fumbled salutes, her gaze fixed on only one person. She walked forward, her steps deliberate, stopping directly in front of the seated old woman. Anna Vance looked up, her pale blue eyes meeting the Admiral's. She made no move to stand. The Admiral's gaze dropped to her forearm, to the faded ink that had been the subject of such ridicule. Her expression, hard as granite just moments before, softened. The lines of command melted away, replaced by something akin to awe. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, yet it carried an authority that filled the small room and spilled out into the silent mess hall beyond. "That emblem," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I've only seen it in classified history books and intelligence briefings. She turned her head slightly, her eyes never leaving Anna. Master Chief, give me your file. The hard copy. Now. The Master Chief nodded once and disappeared. The Admiral turned back to Anna. Then, in a gesture that sent a shockwave through every single person watching, Admiral Miller, a 3-star flag officer, slowly and deliberately brought her hand up in a crisp, perfect salute. She held it there, her arm rigid, her gaze locked on the old woman who served peas and carrots. The silence was absolute. The lieutenant looked as if he might actually collapse. "It is an honor, ma'am," the Admiral said, her voice ringing with a sincerity that was unmistakable. The Master Chief returned, handing her a thin, worn file. With her free hand, the Admiral opened it. Then, in a clear, strong voice that carried throughout the mess hall, she began to read. Anna Vance, recipient of a Navy Cross. The Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters. The Bronze Star with Valor Device. With each medal she named, a collective, audible gasp rippled through the onlookers. These were not mere decorations. They were markers of almost mythical heroism. She paused, looking up from the file and directly at Anna. Your entire unit was listed as missing in action behind enemy lines for 6 days. You were the only one who walked out. You carried 2 wounded teammates over 30 kilometers of hostile mountain terrain to an extraction point. She closed the file. The story hung in the air, a testament to a courage almost beyond comprehension. Only then did she turn her piercing gaze on the 2 men who now seemed to be physically shrinking. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Petty officer, you have 2 choices. You can tender your resignations from the United States Navy by sundown, or you can face a court-martial for conduct unbecoming and the public humiliation of a national hero. I suggest you choose wisely." She turned back to Anna, her demeanor softening once more. "Ms. Vance, on behalf of the United States Navy, I offer our most profound and humble apology. What happened here today is a disgrace." She paused. "What, if anything, do you have to say to them?" Anna looked at the 2 pale, trembling men. She saw not monsters, but lost boys drunk on a little bit of power. "Respect," Anna said, her voice as calm and steady as a northern star. "It isn't in the rank you wear. It's in the person you are. You have to earn it every single day." As she spoke, another memory flashed, a boy of 19, her best friend, carefully inking the tattoo on her arm in a dusty tent. "Now," he'd said with a grin, "no matter what happens, they'll know who we were." He never made it to the extraction point. The tattoo wasn't a decoration. It was a scar. It was a promise. This story isn't just about a tattoo. It's a powerful reminder that heroes rarely wear signs. They walk among us, hidden in plain sight, carrying the weight of their history in silence. True strength and honor aren't found in a crisp uniform or a loud voice, but in the quiet dignity of a life lived with courage. It reminds us that behind every pair of eyes, there's a story we know nothing about. Have you ever misjudged someone based on their job or appearance? What would you have done if you were standing in that line, watching this unfold? And do you think our society does enough to truly recognize the quiet heroes who ask for nothing in return? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We value every perspective. If this story opened your eyes to the legends walking among us, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about hidden heroes. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that a person's worth is not defined by their job title. We read every single comment and appreciate you being part of this community. More stories about incredible veterans and unsung heroes are waiting on your screen right now. Watch those next, and we'll see you tomorrow with another story that will change how you see the world.